us from. I'm joined today by my great esteemed friend and colleague, Yvette Sanchez Fuentes. Yvette, you want to say hello quickly?
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon from wherever you're coming from. And thanks for joining us today. We're looking forward to having a conversation and making sure that we answer your questions and respond to your comments as much as possible.
Thanks. Yeah, we've been working hard to make sure we're making these webinars interesting and interactive. So we will have a few slides, but really we'll work to be really conversational as well. All right, so we do still see people sort of joining, but why don't we go ahead and get started? We always like to start with just a few housekeeping things. First, obviously, we're so happy to have you with us. We do want to make sure everybody knows that tomorrow you'll get an email that will have a link to this recording, your certification, and additional resources that we may mention in the context of this webinar. But if you have questions, please feel free to ask those either in the chat, or you can also use the dedicated Q&A box that you see there to ask questions. Our colleague Amanda Klein is watching those as they come in, and will make sure to prompt us to respond to the specific questions that you have. All right, so just a little bit about Teachstone. So Teachstone is actually an organization that has been around for over a decade, really from the beginning of class and Head Start. In fact, I really attribute Head Start and the work that we've done over time with Head Start to making Teachstone who we are today. And I had the pleasure of meeting Yvette very early on in the days of classes use in the context of Head Start. But we're an educational company. We're located in Charlottesville, but we have colleagues who work with us across the country. And as hopefully most of you know, we really are the organization that developed the class and have worked to disseminate it from the very early days. And I think today is just an exciting moment where we have an opportunity to talk about the continuation of the use of class in ways that most ultimately will impact the lives of young children. And, you know, I can't say hello to everyone without also just taking a moment to acknowledge the moment of right now and recognize the sort of stress and strain that we are all feeling right now as we work our best and so hard to make sure that all of our children have access to high quality learning experiences. So we thought it would be helpful just to start out actually by getting a sense of what school looks like for you right now in your Head Start program. So just take a moment to respond to this poll about how you're actually serving children. Are you doing it in a socially distanced classroom, virtually, or in some kind of a hybrid model? So we see responses coming in, a lot of virtual with a little bit of socially distanced and hybrid. And I know this as a parent and in my day job is a constantly sort of changing and modifying. What school looks like is constantly changing for us. So we have about 200 votes in so far. And so far about 56% are all virtual, 24% are hybrid, and 19% socially distanced. Yvette, as we sort of let people finish out, what is school looking like in your local area right now?
So in Maryland and Montgomery County, we are virtual, and as I've been on Facebook sort of tracking with colleagues, but also neighbors, everybody is having a different experience. And I would say though that folks are getting a little more calmer and patient, and I think just going with the flow, doing the best that we all can every day.
Yeah. All right, so we see that we ended up with about 57% saying that you're working virtually, 20% in socially distanced classrooms, and 23% in hybrid. So now I think we have most people who are joining us, so we'll just take a moment to officially sort of announce and talk about who we are. So I'm Bridget Hamry, one of the co-founders of Teachstone and authors of Class, and really excited to be joined here today with Yvette Sanchez Fuentes, who, as you know, a former director of the Office of Head Start. But Yvette, can you just say a little bit about who you are and what you've been doing in recent years?
Sure. So thanks. First off, welcome everyone. Bienvenidos. Really excited to have this discussion today. And thanks to Bridget and the team for all their work on putting this together. So I have worked both at the federal level, but spent a couple of years at the local level in a Head Start program locally, which was very exciting to sort of see all the pieces come together. And I'm happy to be working with Teachstone to support their work as we move forward in this new journey around DRS and all of the opportunities that that brings today. And I'm in Gaithersburg, Maryland, and like everybody else, working virtually.
Well, I mean, there are many reasons why I am excited to be joined by Yvette, but I particularly just love the fact that you have a part of your head in federal policy and a part of your head and heart really at home with programs. So I think that makes you particularly well situated to talk about what we're going to talk about today in terms of how changes in federal policy are going to impact programs. Liz, who's helping us sort of move quickly around through this, I appreciate that. So, you know, I think one of the main messages that we have as we think about what classrooms look like right now is just that we know, and I know all of you know, that interactions are really at the core of what great teaching looks like, whether those are being delivered in socially distanced classroom, in some kind of hybrid, in virtual settings. But we also know that there are challenges in each of those settings. And we've been working really, really hard to make sure people have the guidance that they need to understand and support teachers and coaches and educators in all of those settings. So that's not going to be the focus of what we talk about today. But if you haven't had an opportunity to see some of those resources, they're all freely available up on our website. We'll make sure that you have access to those and we'll link to them in the email that we send out today or tomorrow. All right, so as we get kicked off for our conversation right now, let's just get a pulse. You know, it's interesting. So class has been a part of the Head Start system for over a decade, but as we are out and about in the world, we understand that people's approach to using class is very different. So we thought we'd just take a moment to get a pulse on how you use class in your program. So are you a program who primarily uses class just as you get your monitoring data, but you don't really use it in your program? Do you get most of your class resources from TNTA? Do you have a few folks in your program who are trained around class, or are you one of those programs who really uses class extensively, such that all classrooms are regularly observed and teachers are receiving ongoing training and coaching? So we'll give a moment for this to come in. And maybe as it's coming in, Yvette, this was actually one of the conversations that occurred early on in the class use in Head Start. So it's sort of put in as a part of federal policy, but the intention was always to support programs. So I'm just curious to have you sort of reflect on what you've learned over the last decade about managing between policy and practice in this space.
I mean, I think what's really important about going from the policy to the practice is helping teachers and other staff who support our kids and our families every day to understand really the intent of the class tool, and really not just the class tool, but any tool, right? What's the intention behind it, so that we can provide the supports and the training that teachers and other caregivers need. And, you know, when I think about sort of the evolution of the last decade, as we have been thinking about assessment, one of the things that I always say is that before the reauthorization and before class, we really looked at all of the stuff that we had in our classrooms. And I think what class really taught us, along with the brain research, was that we had to really be looking at what was happening between the adult caregivers and our kids. And so I think it like moved us to the next place, and I think we're just going to keep growing.
That's great. And I think we see in the poll great evidence of the impact of your work, Yvette. We have, and I'll sort of share the results here. You see we have about 75% of the folks on the call saying that they use it extensively at the classroom level. So even though that's not technically a requirement, you folks who are joining us have really taken the sort of true meaning of class, which has always been not just as an assessment tool, but as a tool that was meant to support ongoing program improvement. So that's exciting to see. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing this. And Yvette, well, I'm going to turn it over to you because I think federal policy can get complicated, and you are amazing at explaining complicated things in pretty simple ways. Could you just walk us through a little bit about what these recent rule changes actually mean for programs?
Absolutely. So just really, folks can read the slides, but we'll just share a little bit of history. And also, please remember putting your comments and your questions in the chat box, and we will definitely try to get to those. So I think most folks on this call know that via the 2007 reauthorization of Head Start, the Department of Health and Human Services and the Office of Head Start specifically was required to implement the designation renewal system, or as we all like to call it, recompetition. But I want to remind folks that there were really two things about this new rule that were critical. The first one was that we wanted to define what high quality looked like and figure out what that was. And then the second is that we actually remember we're moving grants to 5-year grants. Head Start programs have traditionally had, grants forever. And this rule really changed us from that to a 5-year grant period. So two really important things to remember. And then the other piece I just want to mention, which you can see the quote from Dr. B, who is the current director of the Office of Head Start, is that really we want to remember that the whole point around recompetition is to think about our continuous quality improvement, and that we're not just always thinking about compliance, but we're thinking about doing the right thing, and that we know when we implement good practices, we actually are meeting the Head Start program performance standards. So lots of pieces there, but just remember, like when you're doing the right thing, you're implementing the best practices, you're using valid and reliable research-based tools, you're meeting the Head Start performance standards, but most importantly, you're doing what's good for kids and families in your communities. Next slide. So just a little bit of history. If you all remember, the original reg included a 10% threshold, which meant that if grantees scored in the lowest 10%, they automatically went into competition. What's really important about this slide is that you should see how the scores have gone up over the years, right? And so what I really think about when I think about this is that programs took it seriously and they used the class tool as it was intended as a PD tool, but also brought in other resources in order to make sure that their scores were going up, because this is one of the ways that we are defining quality as it relates to monitoring and Head Start. Next slide, Liz, please. And then obviously same kind of thing, if you just take a look at this again, you'll see from 2012 through 2020 that scores have gone progressively up. So we know that programs have been working on this, and we know it's not easy. We knew it wasn't going to be easy when we did this 10 years ago or more than 10 years ago, but we knew that the intent to really help grantees continue to think about continuous quality improvement and how to support caregivers in educational settings, whether it was in classrooms or homes, was what we wanted to see, right? We just want to see folks continue to improve, to get better, and to even thinking about how do they use the latest research or innovations to really support kids and families. Next slide, please. So we talked about this a little bit already, right? So the purpose of the recompetition rule, or DRS, was really to transition all grants from indefinite grants to 5-year grants, but also to make a determination about who was providing quality. Some of you who have been around for a while will remember that in the early 2000s, there were several GAO reports, government accountability reports, that talked about the varied levels of quality across Head Start programs, and also talked about the use of the monitoring system at the time in order to determine who was providing quality. So really all of this stemmed from some research and data and information gathering that had been happening for quite some time. And Congress authorized this in 2007. And then during the Obama administration, we really moved forward with amazing partners like Bridget and others to think about how do we put a system in place that is both fair but also easily understandable. Next slide, please. So in 2007, as you can see really quickly, or 2011, this is the original DRS, and I'm going to focus specifically here on number 3. So we had made a decision back when we started this process in 2010 to think about what were the tools out there. And if you go back to the law, one of the things that it specifically said was that we had to find a tool that was valid and reliable and had been research-based. And class was that tool. We worked really hard and hand in hand with Bridget and Bob and others at Teachstone to think about how we could really make a distinction between the tool as a PD instrument, which it was intended as, but then how would we use it in monitoring in a way that would not confuse or make one, more than the other. So that's where we decided to go. We decided to go with the class. And then it also included, obviously, the 10%, which is really where grantees had the most comments, because there's not a definite threshold on that. So just want to remind folks, it was very thoughtful. We know it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy back then. But I think we've all learned a lot, and I think that the new rule represents that.
Hey, Yvette, I'm going to interrupt you just for a moment, because there was a question in the chat that I think is relevant, because you were tasked with finding a sort of research-based tool. And in the sort of longer document of the rule changes, I think the office does a really nice job actually of summarizing some of the research and more recent research on class. But the question was actually, what about this recent Boston study, and is Teachstone going to respond to that? So I'll just take a moment now to respond and say, yes, we will be getting out a sort of more formal response. But in general, the response is, I founded this company on evidence. I care about all research and evidence, and I'm friends and colleagues with the folks who wrote that paper, and interested in talking to them more about why they didn't find findings in that particular Boston study. But we also have to remember that we have 200 peer-reviewed papers that actually do demonstrate a correlation between class and outcomes. So yes, we always want to pay attention to why sometimes things may not be working, but also ground ourselves in the big amount of data that we actually have on class working. And many of you have that at the local level in your program. So I appreciate that question coming in.
Good question. Yep. Okay, let's see the new stuff. Next slide, please, Liz. So here are the changes to the 7 conditions. Obviously, you can totally read through those, but we'll just sort of highlight the ones in red. So in the final rule, we go from having one deficiency to 2 deficiencies. That will move you into competition. Obviously around class, and we'll talk more about this in detail, we dropped the lowest 10%, and there are now both competitive and quality thresholds. And then number 7, which I think is really interesting, is the audit trigger has also changed tremendously, going from a going concern and 1 or more audit findings of material weakness to actually 2. So really to say that when you have a moment, if you haven't actually read this new reg, as Bridget said, it's really, the summary is really quite good, and it really talks through all of the data that has been collected over the last decade to think about what needed to change and what needed to be updated. Next slide. So specific to class, obviously the big one here is that the criterion around the lowest 10% has been completely dropped off. And I think that both is based on all of the data from the last decade about how Head Start programs are doing on the monitoring using class, but also really on the very fact that the community kept sort of this drumbeat up about what the purpose of that 10% was. And so, I think the Office of Head Start really took their time to listen, and hopefully many of you put in your comments. So there are 2 very significant changes here as it relates to the thresholds. So we still have the competitive thresholds, which we had in the original reg, but now we've got sort of this new competitive threshold that raises it up, moving emotional support from a 4 to a 5, classroom organization from a 3 to a 5, and instructional support from a 2 to a 2.3, But keep in mind that instructional support threshold will go up to a 2.5 in 2025. So this is a really good opportunity for programs to think about what you're doing in order to make sure that you're scoring above these competitive thresholds. You've got a little bit of time here, and it's really a great time to stop, to look at what's happening, to have some conversations, and then to have some really thoughtful planning around what needs to change in your program design in order to support your teachers and other caregivers so that they have the skills and the knowledge and the abilities in order to make differences in their classrooms. And then the third piece, which is a really interesting piece, I think, is that the feds have established a quality threshold, meaning that if you score below any of the thresholds that you see on there, so a 6 for emotional, a 6 for classroom, and a 3 for instructional support, the feds are not going to target you in a negative way. They're actually really going to target you in order to ensure that you're getting the TNTA that you need in a very individualized way so that you can get the scores up to that level. So really important piece here. And I would actually encourage programs that if you're in between the competitive and the quality threshold, again, you may really want to start to have some conversations about what's going on in your program, what changes need to be made, what things need to be enhanced, and start to think about what your staff, your teachers, and your other caregivers are saying about what they need so that you can really figure out how to be thoughtful with your resources about what needs to happen in your program. Because it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take some time. So we want to start early. Next slide, please.
So I think Yvette, now let's just have a little bit of a sort of conversation about this. So what's, I can say just, again, I remember the very first time I was sitting in my office at UVA and Bob said, hey, can you join me in my office? Bob Pianta, one of the other authors of Class. The Office of Head Start wants to talk to us about the use of Class in their system. And we hadn't heard anything about it prior to that call. And one of the things that I was so appreciative about of Bob in that moment is from the very beginning, we said, we see a great opportunity in use of Class as a part of federal monitoring, but we can't do that work unless we're also investing on the improvement side. And so to me, this sort of, I love that quote from Dr. B, because I think it is sort of bringing us back home to that original intent around the use of Class. Yes, it's monitoring, but really only to the extent that it drives improvement. And I think we've had lots of conversations with the office over the years, and I think and you said this about it, just deeply appreciative that I feel like they've really listened to the field and responded. And the other thing I think that I recognize in what's written is change is hard, and changing interactions is not as simple. One of my favorite other stories from early on is right after Class got put in the regs, we got calls from all these publishers who are like, we want to produce, sell materials that are going to raise Class scores. And it's just not that easy. So, the Head Start community has been working so hard over time to figure out how do you do the hard work of ensuring that all kids have access to great teaching. And so I really see these changes in regulations as being supportive of that.
Yeah. So I think, Bridget, just really quickly, I know you're supportive of the changes, but what was your initial reaction to these changes?
Yeah, I think we were excited and surprised. I think, we'd heard a lot about the 10%, but we weren't sure how the office was going to come down on that. So I think that sort of recognition and listening to the community, I think was excited. And then I think we've both said this, but taking the time to read through the response, which I did, I just, again, was really appreciated the thoughtfulness, both of the office, but also of the community, the people who responded and challenged the use of Class and articulated what they would need to be able to support. I think my question, I've been very upfront about this is, are we really continuing to equip programs with the supports they need on the improvement side? So I see great opportunities for that, and I'm excited about that, and look forward to see how this new level, this new band of folks who are above the minimum threshold, but identified a need for continuous improvement, how can we all sort of come together as a community to make sure they have what they need to do those, to make those improvements?
Yeah, so we've sort of been through this journey together for a while, in very different roles since it started to today. And you've seen this from lots of different perspectives, both as the author, I think as a researcher, now as the CEO of Teachstone, and we've had these continuous conversations about how programs are doing. And so I think as from your role as both, I think as CEO, but also as somebody who does, I think also really listen well to what programs need. What do you suggest that programs do with this time? So I mentioned that there's some time here, right? Like we're all kind of virtual. We're trying to figure out what we're going to do. 2025 is down the road, and then it's going to 2.5 will kick in. But what do you suggest that programs do during this time to try to plan up?
Yeah, well, I think we've spent the last decade really listening to the field on that side of things, right? Because it's not as simple as just doing class. In fact, I love it when people tell me that they're doing class. I never really know what that means. So I think we have some pretty clear lessons learned at the highest level. I would say I know a program is on the right path if they're not asking us, how do I improve my class scores? But rather they're asking us, what can we do to ensure that every child in our program has access to high quality teaching? And I think that goes back to the quote, if we're seeing this as compliance and about numbers, then we're not going to be doing the authentic work that we need to do to really make changes. So I don't know, I'm curious about your perspective on that. How do you think we can support programs at a high level, sort of, it is a compliance tool,
Yeah.
but how do we help them sort of move from compliance to improvement? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've been having those conversations. And I think programs are also getting to that point, right? Where they want to have those conversations too about monitoring, driving improvement. And so when I think about sort of my work with Teachstone, I think that we have started to have those conversations about how do we support programs in more intentional ways to make sure that we're supporting teachers. And, I think one of the things I would ask programs to do is for leaders to have conversations with teachers, but then also come back and have a conversation with somebody at Teachstone and talk about like what you're hearing from your teachers about what they need, so that then we can really figure out how to do something that's both individualized and intentional to support our teachers, because ultimately that's where the change is going to happen, right? And so but I think often we get, our decision makers are the ones who are leading all of this. But I want to challenge grantees to like flip that and let's see what teachers say and help them figure it out, because I know that teachers get really excited when they join webinars that Teachstone is doing, and they're talking to the trainers like Andy, and like they're just like super excited about all of this. So I would want grantees to really think about that, but I also appreciate that Teachstone continues to listen and also learn, and think about the products and the resources that grantees need.
Yeah, so and Liz, if you go to the next slide, and we'll sort of put the slideshow back up. I think I did a sort of version of this at a Head Start meeting about a year ago, but I think we're trying to sort of consolidate. We worked with lots of programs, and so what have we learned about what effective Head Start programs do with class, where we really start to see improvements in the number of children who have access to great teachers? So there's a few things, and you've highlighted a few of these. First, I think we see programs that really have a shared vision of what great teaching looks like. And so I can walk into a program and I know that they're doing a great job in class if I can walk into any classroom and I say the words language modeling, and people know that's about sort of back and forth exchanges and advanced language. And there's just this idea across the program of what good teaching looks like. We see in some cases, and this was a part of our question that we asked, in some cases, class knowledge is sort of isolated in the education coordinators or coaches, and hasn't really gotten to the level of teachers, but maybe most importantly to leaders. So we'll come back to that because I think we were a little slow to think about how best to support leaders around class. So I'll talk about that in a minute. Another thing is making sure that class doesn't feel like something separate, but that it really is built into the ecosystem of the program. And that can really help buy-in. So the biggest place we see this is around curriculum, right? So if I have to get my creative curriculum or Connect for Learning training or Frog Street training, and then I have to go get my class training, it becomes challenging to know. And so I think we have work to do, and we're innovating in that space and working with some of our curriculum partners to make sure we have even sort of more integrated approaches to understanding. But I think at the highest level, we do have crosswalks available. And I think just helping teachers see that when you're doing a good job of your small group instruction, as an example, there's great opportunities to enhance your interactions around class. So that I really see that integration is something that great programs are doing. We also see the need to build internal expertise, right? So again, we sort of asked that at the beginning, but I think the more, and we worked really hard, it doesn't help if we at Teachstone and at class are the only experts. We need to build that expertise and really want to be with you on a journey of where that expertise starts from the very beginnings to how that extends over time to get a deeper, richer understanding of how interactions can support development and learning. In a very pragmatic way, we also see, and many of you said you do this, that in effective programs, they're using class data regularly. So at minimum, they're doing it in the fall and spring, and they're using those data. Leaders are using those data to make decisions about the kind of professional development they're doing, how to allocate resources. And you also see real informal use of class, so that coaches are regularly collecting class data, even if it's for a smaller sample of time and doing those informal observations, but getting teachers sort of frequent information about what they're doing. And then finally, I'll just say, and I think this is another area where we can continue to do more, but we know that interactions are important, not just between teachers and children, but at all levels. So when you see strong programs, we really see a modeling of effective interactions between leaders and teachers, between teachers and coaches. In fact, we have a master coaching program where we've tried to articulate what strong relationships, what self-management looks like for a coach, because we know that these interactions that are important for kids are also important in all of our interactions. And you see that in great programs. People love being there, even in the most challenging of times like we have today. So as I said, we've really worked to provide scalable solutions to these problems, and that's a part of what makes Teachstone unique. So I'm just going to talk about a few things that we've developed more recently that are really responsive to the needs that we've heard. So Liz, if you go to the next slide, one of the things I was really excited, I got an opportunity when I came back full-time to Teachstone about 2 years ago to lean into this project, and it was so exciting. So we launched just about 6 months ago a primer for leaders around class, and that was really responsive. In fact, Dr. B really asked us, do all leaders, sort of site-based leaders, know and understand the class? Do they know how to use the data? Do they know how to support their teachers? And we recognize we didn't really have the right kind of training and support for them. So we've developed this online program. It's relatively short, 2 hours, can be completed entirely on your phone. And it is not going to provide super depth of knowledge around class, but provides a nice foundation. And, we have some quotes here from folks who've taken it, but one of the best examples I like to talk about in this space is just in some of our work in Louisiana, where they really have a very broad implementation of class across the state, and how they really started to see transformation happening when their elementary school principals went through training on class. Because as you all, I'm sure, are aware, many of our elementary school principals really have very little training around what child development looks like, what effective classrooms and preschool classrooms could look like, and that creates a lot of challenges for our Head Start programs that are sitting in schools and as a sort of transition into more formal schooling. So I think this is an opportunity to start to share some of that knowledge and expertise around interactions with a broader community. So we're really excited about that, and we'll be interested for feedback from all of you if you've been through this program, if you have suggestions for us around other things we can do to support we really are looking to do that. The other good thing about online programs is it helps make sure that they're really inexpensive and accessible, which is hugely important for us as we want to have an impact on the field. Similarly, I actually, back in my UVA days, got a grant to develop an online course around class for teachers. We tested that, and we actually tried to scale it out of UVA. We tried to get lots of more people enrolled and struggled with that. But I think that's something at Teachstone that we are really experts at, is how to take something and make it really usable for the field. So we just recently, a few months ago, launched these foundations courses for teachers. So really affordable ways. It's about an hour per class dimension to give deep knowledge and understanding for your teachers, or at least a sort of intro, good foundation knowledge about each of the dimensions. And you know, we're happy to share sort of some examples of this course with anyone who's interested, but my very favorite part is some of our most amazing trainers, including Marnetta and Andy, who Yvette mentioned, are guides on this journey, and they just do such an amazing job of making class very approachable for teachers. So this is not about how to score on class. It's very practical information for teachers about how do you actually make this live in your classroom. Tons of video examples, and just a real grounding in interactions in classrooms. And finally, I'll just say, and this really speaks to the quality improvement work that we need to do. Liz, next slide is great. Is we know that we need systems. You all, especially those of you who are directors or who run programs, know you work really hard to try to consolidate all of the data and information you need. And we're constantly trying to evolve a system that allows you to collect your class data in a way, provide meaningful reports to teachers, and then link them to the resources they need. One of the things that we just innovated on that I'm most excited about, and this is going to be a little like class wonky, but I imagine I have some good sort of class wonky people on this call, is that, you know, we have the class dimensions. Let's see, I always have a manual at hand. So, okay, you'll have to, so those of you who are familiar with class, we score, this is productivity, we score productivity. So you get a score from 1 to 7, but there's all this rich information sitting under that. So in productivity, it's about maximizing learning times, routines, transitions, preparation. One of the things our new system allows folks to do is actually to score at that indicator level, just low, mid, high, so it doesn't become an actual numerical score, but it provides much better feedback. We can generate reports that provide that kind of feedback about the sort of indicators to teachers. And then in the future, we're really thinking about how we can then link very specific sort of video resources and examples to teachers. So, you know, one of the fun things about working for Teachstone is that we're always innovating, we're always learning, we're always hearing what the field wants and trying to develop really scalable, practical solutions to your problems. We're also really making sure that we link our My Teachstone system to the other data systems that you use, whether that be Child Plus or anything else, so that the class data can be imported into your broader systems. So I give those just as a few examples of the ways in which we're constantly working to hear what can be useful to help you do this work most effectively. And, you know, I think there's a real opportunity right now to sort of take some time. You know, we haven't heard yet what the office will be doing around monitoring this year, but we know right now, despite all the challenges that are sitting before us right now, I think we know teachers are hungry for support and information. And so I really am excited about ways in which we might work with you to think about how we can support you and your teachers right now as they lean into this most challenging of years. So we have some time left for some Q&A. So I'm gonna bring on my fabulous colleague, Manda Klein, who has deep expertise in Head Start. And Manda, maybe you can just tell us a little bit about some of the questions. But first, please take a moment to introduce yourself to our community.
Hi, everyone. I'm Manda Klein, and good to see everyone that's logged in from all across the country. I've been watching the chat and the Q&A and just excited about the conversation. I know for many years, and I'm a director actually prior to the proposed rule that was originally came out. So we didn't have recompetition when I was a director 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It was, we were on probation, or we, had to submit a plan. And so we've really upped our game in Head Start as it relates to quality, and class has been a huge part of that. So questions that we got, Bridget, were one, like, what would you talk to new teachers or new staff? What would you share with them about class and about quality?
That's a great question. I mean, I think it's important to think of how to approach it in a very approachable way, right? So I think where we've seen, so I'll share an example of a lesson learned, right? So for those of you who might be class trainers, we started out early on in the days with sort of class intro training, and we talked through with teachers about all the dimensions and the indicators and behavioral markers. And as you can imagine, like, people's eyes start to go crazy because it's a lot. So I think, we've really revised our process of the introduction of class, and in our primer, which we have online, we also have it in person. We really emphasize how class at its core is what teachers want to be doing with kids. They want to relate, they want to communicate with kids. And I think some of those just simple messages about class really being a way to help translate what they know and understand from their learning about child development into practical solutions in the classroom is one thing. And the other I would say is, I think I always like to think of small steps that people can take, right? So greeting children at the beginning of the day is an example of just a routine that you can establish that is a great way of engaging in positive climate. So I think, I always like to think of, like, what are 2 or 3 things that a new teacher could just get started in doing, and then sort of slowly build up to their knowledge and understanding of the broader class.
Great. And we have so many, as we saw from the poll earlier, that are actually, with families and children virtually. One of the questions that we had was, how will class be monitored during distance learning? I know the Office of Head Start they haven't actually released a monitoring plan yet, but I know we've put some tips and strategies that we'll also share with Field in a link with the resources that we send out tomorrow. But can you just talk a little bit about some recommendations that you'd make for those that are on the call just listening now?
Yeah, so again, I think we can't answer the question about sort of what monitoring will look like, but we can certainly say that no matter what it looks like, your knowledge and understanding of class should be translating pretty well to the environment. So let's talk first about socially distanced, right? I think one of the big things is about masks and the physical distance. So I will tell you, I actually hate the word socially distanced as a word for describing what our classrooms look like, because you guys know that class is all about social communications. But I think what we're really trying to do is, and teachers across the country are giving us great examples of how do you still foster those positive relationships and help make connections, even in the context of masks and keeping kids 6 feet apart. So I've seen great solutions like teachers having pictures of themselves on their shirts. I think the community comes up with far more great answers to this than we will. I think on the socially distanced front, the other question that we're getting a lot is, how do you support children and sort of manage distance? Do you yell at kids when they start to touch each other, et cetera? So I think that's where, a recognition that we have to be realistic about the expectations for 4-year-olds. And at the end of the day, be patient with yourselves and with your children in this new world. And then just really quickly on the virtual, I mean, I think early on, and Amanda and Vet know this, I didn't think that our 4-year-olds so many of our 4-year-olds would be in virtual settings right now. And I think probably few of us could imagine that. I think I would say, and I imagine most of you agree, that I don't see a future of online learning as taking over 4-year-olds. We need to get them back in classrooms. But I've been so impressed with what I've seen the field doing in terms of being able to transfer what they know and understand about class into these virtual settings. And we have some guidance up, but I think this is a place where our community can be very helpful, and we want to make sure people continue to share their ideas. We're always looking for video examples, so if anybody is feeling open and wants to share some great practices with us, please let us know. Because seeing teaching transforms teaching. And right now, one of the things we know we can do for the community is try to get examples up of what effective interactions look like in this setting. So we're working hard on that, and excited to be able to partner with you if you're interested.
Perfect. And one of the other questions that we have in a virtual environment, how should we support teachers in building regard for student perspective? Our teachers are connecting with the children and the families. So what would recommendations would that be for you? I know you've seen that with your own children, Bridget, with how
Yeah.
so give us some examples of that.
Well, first of all, I feel like I should pull up the guidance because I know we've answered that question probably better than I will answer it. I think, you call out, Manda, this idea of family. So that's, I think, one of the things that sort of structure, I think there's a set of structural things that we need to think about, right? So who has their camera on and who doesn't have their camera on, and what do you do? How do you interact if those cameras aren't on? I think certainly the more kids we can see, the better we can react and respond to them. And then I think families are a whole nother question. How do you actually interact with families and get them to support? I think that offers a great opportunity. I think teachers across the country have no better time than now to actually be modeling what effective interactions look like. So in this particular case of Regard, one of probably the most important thing, and I have 6-year-old twins, so I am living this, is we cannot expect them to be sitting and looking at the screen all the time. And they're going to need to move their little bodies as much as possible, give them opportunities to do that within your sort of formal structure and what you're setting up, but also make sure that, if somebody is, has their head on the table, whatever, that we're giving kids sort of just a lot of flexibility going with the flow of their ideas. Because I've seen great examples even in some of the video we've shot where it's those small moments, right? So when we follow a child's lead, suddenly we're able to bring them back into the virtual setting. So I think there are things we can do. And also, I will say again, just a lot of patience and empathy for everyone is needed right now.
Yeah, I think we're learning so much about ourselves as parents at this moment, just as much as we're learning about just the work in general. We have a couple other questions around leadership training for leaders. I know you talked about the primer for leaders. It's a really great intro for those that are helping either at the site level with the implementation of class, or for superintendents of schools that have never really taken a look at class and really understood the program, or the early childhood program that gives them such great insight and perspective. We do have a number of resources. There's been questions on well, are these things free or is there a charge? And so we can certainly answer any individual questions about that. We have a ton of resources. It's one of the things that we're most excited about in this moment, that we've been able to host webinars with experts on trauma-informed care. And those webinars that we have hosted are all available online for anyone that wants to go and have a look at those conversations that we had. We also have a trauma-informed care series that is built around a lot of the work that those experts around the country have done. And so yes, we have some resources that are available for free, and I encourage you to continue to visit back to our website often, because even, this recording is going to be so helpful to me with how, and it will also of the types of things that we're trying to do for the community for you to go back and take a look at later on.
Manda, I just want to take a moment also to respond. So, some of our things are freely available. Some of them do cost money, and we just have to be honest about that, right? But what I can guarantee you is that through your work at Teachstone, you're sort of coming to the source and we'll get the best value. I mean, that's what we were founded to do. And as I said, we're always looking at ways of making sure that we make these resources as accessible as possible. I'm actually curious, either Amanda, you or Yvette, if this question of sort of resourcing, what recommendations do you have for programs about how they fund some of this work, given the sort of knowledge and understanding of how Head Start is actually funded?
Yeah, I think, this moment, one, in the pandemic that we're living in, or if you're in California, you're living with the fires, and there's just so many things going on. And because, the majority of folks that are on the call said they were doing these things virtually, for me, I think in the moment, it's an opportunity to say, how do we keep moving quality forward? And so we don't know if the Office of Head Start is going to, what they're going to do with monitoring, but it doesn't mean that we should, take our foot off the pedal. Like, I think that we have to find unique ways in our programs to continue building expertise in the program, continue building confidence in teachers, and reminding them that the interactions, whether they're virtual or in person or socially distanced, still are making a huge difference for children who are from very vulnerable homes. And so I think that's one of the things I would say. I know that, resources, the office has been very careful to ensure that programs have the resources that they need to open classrooms or to partially open classrooms, depending on kind of the state regs. And so we want to make sure that we're continuing to provide those types of supports as well here at Teachstone. And I feel like we've been responsive in that moment with all of the resources that we developed, the guidance, the supports, some new trainings, some half-day trainings, some, we've expanded our observation training over time so that it's not 2 full days sitting in front of your Zoom camera, and made some of those available virtually. So I think there's lots of opportunities for programs to continue moving that conversation of quality forward with children, with class, even in this moment.
Yeah.
Yvette?
Yeah, I would just add that it can be really scary to make changes to your program, especially as you think about how do you use money. But I would really challenge programs that, even though many of us have invested a lot of time and resources into some of the tools or curriculums that we've been using for years, you can, in fact, actually change what you use if it is in the best interest of your program, your children, and your family. So I want to encourage programs to not be afraid of that, and to really think about what's best for their programs, and then sit with your fiscal folks and redo your budget.
I did see a couple of questions also in the chat about early Head Start.
Yeah.
And so, Yvette, do you have any thoughts about, so I would say I know that the regs currently don't include class for early Head Start. It's obviously on our radar as we think about reauthorization, but Yvette, any sort of thoughts and ideas about that?
I would just add really quickly that the reason that there is not, why Early Head Start is not included in DRS yet is that it's up to the feds, it's up to the Office of Head Start once they decide on a tool, again, that is valid and reliable and research-based. Once they make a decision about that, then at that point, Early Head Start would be included, similar to Head Start in the class. But for now, all things stay as they are as it relates to Early Head Start. But I would just build off of what Bridget has mentioned in saying that the interactions are important at any age, and especially with our babies. And so as folks are navigating how to have positive quality interactions with babies, if you're wearing masks and all of that, please feel free to reach out, because there's just lots of resources and lots of different ways to think about that.
Yeah, and I saw lots of people posting that you already do. We know there are programs across the country who, even though they're not monitored on it, use class in their early Head Start programs. And I would say no matter what the feds decide to use, they'll use a measure of interactions, and I can guarantee you it'll be aligned with class, even if it isn't class. And so I think any work that you're doing right now on the improvement side to make sure that our babies and toddlers have access to great teaching will be money well spent as we look into the reauthorization in the future.
We're going to continue. We'll continue answering some questions. I have a couple more slides that we just wanted to kind of get through. If Liz can go to the next one. This is a resource that we have, and this is available for everyone. It's our class learning community. It allows teachers, coaches to network with others and ask and answer and share ideas. We've got exclusive content on there, and it is available for free to everyone. So if you're not a member of the learning community, please, share that with your teachers. We're happy to get you signed up. We can help you do that. I'll give you some ways at the end to be able to do that. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Liz. We've also, as Bridget mentioned earlier, we've got a lot of new resources for supporting interactions. I know some of the questions came up, how can we, if we can't have viewers going into classrooms or individuals going into classrooms to coach or monitor. We've got on-demand coaching sessions. We can kind of help you plan that's best suited for the program. So we'd love to just kind of have a conversation with you around, what resources that you have, what resources that we have, and might work together. And then just quickly, because I know we have 5 more minutes still. The next slide, Liz. I know the Office of Head Start did have some funding for trauma informed, and we have put together this great professional development series called Interactions at the Heart of Healing, where we've experts from around the country to put together an online course that, as you can see, ideas and resource for promoting resilience, building relationship equity in your classrooms, how to be anti-bias and a trauma-informed educator. There is a transfer to practice webinar. We also have an emotional support kit that's tied to that. But I'd really encourage all of you. Everyone has experienced something in these moments, and many of these children, even prior to the pandemic, had already experienced more trauma than their little lives needed. So please take a moment and take a look at those resources as well. We'll be sending out some links around that. We've had a number of programs already sign up, and the feedback that we're getting from these courses has just been really amazing. It has been, in some cases, life-changing for teachers. Like, they have used those words and having received some of these resources. And so this is just another way in investing in your program to, again, really work at how interactions are making a difference for children and families.
Amanda, I would just say, I think it's one of those, silver linings, although I hate to even use that word of COVID, which is just, we've had people sort of participate and say, this is like going to a conference on trauma, but that is highly focused on what I can do in my classroom sort of tomorrow. And so, I think getting a chance to listen to national experts talk about trauma, but again, not just talk about the theory, talk really about what I can do tomorrow to support my children and to take care of myself, I think is really exciting. So I'm excited to see the impact that this training can have.
And then our last slide, I think, before we take a few more questions in our last few moments, is we're now offering one-on-one consults with class experts to discuss your program needs and how we can support you in this moment. And it may be just like talking through where you currently are. You've had to hire all new teachers, everyone's online, or, many of you said that you have been doing this for a long time. You're ready to kind of take another step. We just kind of want to see kind of where you are and how we can support you in that next iteration of quality in your program. So there's a couple of different ways you can reach us. There's our email, which is headstart@teachstone.com. Or any of the emails that we have online, our 800 number, and we now have a live chat. So if you love that, I do. Oftentimes I'm with AT&T on the live chat, and I seem to find that more impactful to do a live chat. But we also have a live chat feature on our website now, and lots of resources there. So again, teachstone.com, where you can see, you can subscribe to our blog, and we're all constantly, providing more information there. So there's lots of ways to reach us and find the modality that works best for you, and give us a call or shoot us a note. We're also on Facebook and Twitter and all those social medias for those of you that are very tech savvy. We would love to kind of continue the conversation. Bridget, I know we have like 1 more minute and we want to be respectful of time, but kind of just some final words.
Sure. Well, I would just say thank you to all of you who've been on this journey with us. And I think, for lots of reasons, the world is resetting a little bit right now. And that is painful in many ways, but I think also offers opportunities. So just thank you for being a part of our community, and know that it really, for us, it is all about interactions, which means interactions from you. And we want to hear from you. We want to respond to you. That's what we're here to do. And maybe I'll just also leave with this as we look to our future. I think one of the things that we've been hearing a lot and that we know is that we we need to do more to support interactions around dual language learning, around equitable teaching practices. So that is sort of front of and center of our minds right now. And so we'll be doing a lot of work in the coming months and years to make sure that class is really a tool that can be used to support equitable teaching, to support programs across the continuum, and really just encourage you to continue to send feedback and ideas, because we listen and we respond. And Yvette, I don't know if you're able to turn your camera back on just to say goodbye, but just deeply appreciative of all of our Head Start colleagues at the program level, at the federal level, and Yvette, any sort of final words from your federal wisdom of and support for programs?
I would just say, keep doing what you're doing. Do what's best for kids and families, and you'll always be doing what's right, and you'll always be meeting your Head Start program performance standards.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. As we said, we'll send out tomorrow an email that'll have a link to this webinar, so you can access it after. You'll get a certificate of completion, and please always feel free to reach out with any additional questions. Goodbye everybody, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks everyone.